Billionaire trapped in an elevator by his fiancée. His maid's courage saved his life. Alexander Thornton had everything a man could want at 34. His technology empire, Thornton Industries, had made him the fifth richest person in America. His penthouse suite overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline, a monument to his success. And in 3 months, he would marry Victoria Ashworth, the stunning socialite who had captured his heart, or so he thought. But on that humid August evening, as Alexander rode the private elevator to his penthouse, he was thinking about someone else entirely. Elena Martinez, his live-in maid of 2 years, had looked unusually pale that morning. At 28, she was young, resilient, and rarely showed weakness. Yet he'd noticed her hands trembling as she served his breakfast. "Are you feeling all right?" he'd asked, surprising himself with the genuine concern in his voice. Elena had smiled that soft, reassuring smile of hers. "Just tired, Mr. Thornton. Nothing to worry about." But Alexander did worry. Over the past 2 years, Elena had become more than just an employee. She was the person who remembered he preferred his coffee dark as midnight, who left classical music playing softly when she knew he'd had a stressful day, who somehow understood his silences better than Victoria understood his words. The elevator lurched slightly as it passed the 42nd floor. Alexander frowned, glancing at his Patek Philippe watch. 8:47 p.m. Victoria was waiting at Le Bernardin for their dinner reservation. He should have left the office an hour ago, but the merger with Chin Technologies had required his immediate attention. The elevator lurched again, more violently this time. Then the lights flickered. "What the—" Alexander's words were cut off as the elevator came to a sudden, jarring stop. The main lights died, leaving only the dim emergency lighting casting eerie shadows in the confined space. He immediately pulled out his phone. No signal. The building's steel and concrete construction made it nearly impossible to get reception in the elevator shaft. He pressed the emergency call button, but only silence answered. "Mr. Thornton?" A soft voice came from behind him. Alexander spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. In the shadows of the corner, Elena sat on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest. He'd been so preoccupied with his phone that he hadn't even noticed her. "Elena? What are you doing here?" He moved closer, crouching beside her. In the dim light, he could see she was even paler than she'd been that morning, and her breathing seemed shallow. I was bringing your dinner jacket to the penthouse," she said quietly, gesturing to a garment bag beside her. "You left it at the dry cleaners. Ms. Ashworth called and said you'd need it for tonight." Alexander felt a pang of guilt. Victoria had likely called Elena instead of him because he'd been ignoring her texts all afternoon. "Are you okay? You don't look well." Elena attempted another smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The elevator stopping startled me. That's all." Alexander studied her face, noticing the slight sheen of sweat on her forehead despite the elevator's cooling temperature. Something was wrong, but before he could press further, his phone buzzed with a single text that had somehow pushed through. It was from Victoria. "Enjoy your evening. We'll talk about your future soon." The message struck him as odd. Victoria knew he was trapped. The building management must have notified her by now. Why wasn't she worried? Why the cryptic message? He tried calling her, but the call wouldn't connect. He tried the emergency button again. Nothing. "It's going to be okay," Elena said softly, though her voice wavered. "The building has protocols. They'll get us out soon." Alexander sat down beside her, his expensive suit crinkling against the elevator wall. "How can you be so calm?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Because panic doesn't help. My mother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." "Wise woman, your mother." "She was," Elena said, and Alexander heard the past tense, the old grief carefully hidden. She'd mentioned once, briefly, that her mother had passed away 3 years ago. She never spoke of her father. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound their breathing and the distant hum of the building's systems. Alexander found himself hyper-aware of Elena's presence beside him, the subtle scent of lavender from her soap, the way she kept flexing her fingers as if trying to work out tension. "Elena, Are you sure you're all right? He asked again, unable to shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. She turned to look at him, and in her dark eyes, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Fear, yes, but also resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment. Mr. Thornton, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something. About Ms. Ashworth. About tonight. Before she could continue, a strange hissing sound began emanating from the elevator's ventilation system. Alexander's head snapped up. The sound was subtle, but unmistakable. Elena heard it too. Her eyes widened, and she struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. That's not normal. Alexander stood quickly, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. He moved to the ventilation grate, listening carefully. The hissing continued, and with it came a faint, chemical smell. His blood ran cold. This wasn't a simple elevator malfunction. This was something far worse. Cover your nose and mouth. Elena's voice cut through Alexander's shock, sharp with urgency. Before he could react, she'd pulled off the lightweight cardigan she wore and pressed it against his face. Elena, what? Carbon monoxide, she gasped, using her other hand to cover her own nose and mouth with her shirt collar. Or something worse. Mr. Thornton, this isn't an accident. Alexander's mind raced. His building had state-of-the-art safety systems, backup generators, redundant emergency protocols. For both the elevator to fail and something to be pumping through the ventilation simultaneously was virtually impossible. Unless someone had made it possible. How do you know? He asked, his voice muffled by the cardigan. Elena's eyes met his, and he saw tears beginning to form. Because I knew this was going to happen. I tried to warn you, but I was too afraid. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thornton. I'm so sorry. Alexander felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him for the second time that night. What are you talking about? Elena's legs seemed to give out, and she slid down the wall back to the floor. Alexander immediately joined her, still holding the cardigan to his face. The chemical smell was growing stronger. 3 weeks ago, Elena began, her words coming in short bursts. I overheard Ms. Ashworth on the phone. I was cleaning the guest room while she was on the balcony. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but her voice, she sounded different. Cold. She was talking to someone about elevator maintenance schedules, about the ventilation system, about life insurance policies. Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. That doesn't mean... She said your name. Elena interrupted, her voice breaking. She said, once Alexander is gone, everything will be mine. The wedding was just to make sure the prenup wouldn't matter. I heard her laugh, Mr. Thornton. She laughed. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. Victoria. His Victoria, who smiled at him over candlelit dinners, who charmed his business associates, who had whispered, I love you 1,000 times. It couldn't be true. But even as he tried to reject the idea, pieces began falling into place. Victoria's insistence that he update his will before the wedding, making her the primary beneficiary. Her sudden interest in his building's security systems. The way she'd been subtly encouraging him to let go of staff, to reduce the number of people who had access to his private spaces. Everyone except Elena. Why didn't you tell me? Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer. Elena's tears spilled over. Because who would believe a maid over a woman like Victoria Ashworth? I'm nobody, Mr. Thornton. I'm an immigrant's daughter who cleans houses for a living. She's Manhattan royalty. I thought if I just watched carefully, if I could find proof, then maybe... You stayed to protect me, Alexander said, the realization hitting him with stunning clarity. That's why you've been looking so tired, so worried. You've been afraid for me. Elena nodded, wiping her tears with shaking hands. I started eating your food before you did, checking for anything unusual. I monitored who came and went from the penthouse. I even learned to pick locks so I could check her room when she wasn't there. She let out a bitter laugh. Lot of good it did. I found some strange emails on her laptop, but I didn't understand them. Technical specifications, building schematics. I should have done more. I should have found a way to make you listen. Alexander reached out and took her hand, squeezing it firmly. "Elena, look at me." When she did, he saw not just tears but determination in her eyes. "You did everything you could. And right now you're here with me, which means we have a chance." The hissing from the ventilation grew louder, and Elena coughed, a wet, rasping sound that alarmed Alexander. "How long do we have?" he asked. Elena's medical knowledge was limited, but she'd grown up in a neighborhood where people learn to recognize danger quickly. "Depends on what it is. Could be minutes, could be an hour. But, Mr. Thornton, I need you to know something." She paused, gathering her courage. "I took one of your water bottles from the fridge before I came down. I was thirsty, and I drank from it." Alexander's eyes widened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think it was drugged," Elena whispered. "I've been feeling strange all day. Dizzy, nauseous. I thought I was just anxious about tonight. I had this feeling something bad was going to happen. But now I think Victoria put something in your drinks. Something to make you weak, disoriented. So you couldn't fight back." Horror washed over Alexander. Elena had been poisoned because of him. Because she'd tried to protect him by drinking from his water bottle. "How much did you drink?" "Just a few sips. But, Mr. Thornton, if I'm right, we don't have much time. Whatever she gave me is making it hard to focus. My hands keep going numb." She demonstrated by trying to flex her fingers again, and Alexander saw they were trembling badly. He looked around the elevator with new eyes. Every surface, every corner became a potential tool or resource. The garment bag, his belt, her shoes, the emergency panel. "Think," he commanded himself. "Think like you did when you built your company from nothing." "The emergency panel," he said suddenly. "The call button isn't working, but what about the panel itself? Can we remove it?" Elena tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. "I can't. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." Alexander moved to the panel, examining it closely. His fingers found the edges, and he pulled, but it wouldn't budge. He needed a tool. He pulled off his Patek Philippe watch, $50,000 of Swiss engineering, and used the metal clasp to work at the panel screws. "She planned this perfectly," Elena said from the floor, her voice growing weaker. "She knew you'd be working late. She knew I'd be bringing your jacket. She probably disabled the emergency systems remotely. The building security, they might not even know we're trapped." "Someone will notice," Alexander insisted, though doubt gnawed at him. "Victoria said we had dinner reservations. When I don't show up..." "She'll tell them you canceled," Elena interrupted. "She'll say you and I left together. She'll create a story. She's been creating stories about us for weeks." Alexander paused in his work on the panel. "What do you mean?" Elena's expression was pained. "She's been insinuating things to your staff, to her friends. Suggesting that you and I are having an affair. Creating evidence where there is none. When you disappear, when I disappear, everyone will believe we ran away together. They'll think it was a scandal, a tragedy. No one will suspect murder." The watch clasp slipped, cutting Alexander's hand. Blood welled up, but he barely noticed. The true horror of Victoria's plan was becoming clear. She hadn't just planned to kill him. She'd planned to destroy his reputation, to hurt Elena, to craft a narrative that would leave her blameless and wealthy. "Why?" he asked, though he wasn't sure if he was asking Elena or the universe itself. "Why would she do this?" "Money," Elena said simply. "And maybe she never loved you at all. Maybe all of it was an act." The panel finally came loose, revealing a tangle of wires behind it. Alexander had no idea which did what, but he had to try something. "Elena, I need you to stay awake," he said, glancing back at her. Her eyes were starting to flutter closed. "Talk to me. Tell me about your mother." Elena's eyes opened slightly. She was strong, like you need to be now. "I can't be strong enough for both of us. I need you, Elena. Please." And in that moment, Alexander realized with stunning clarity that it was true. He needed Elena Martinez, his maid, his guardian angel who he'd been too blind to truly see. Not Victoria with her practiced smiles and calculated charm, but Elena with her quiet courage and selfless heart. He turned back to the wires, determined to find a way out. For both of them. Alexander's hands moved through the wiring with desperate precision, but he had no idea what he was doing. He was a tech CEO, not an electrician. Each wire he touched could either save them or make things worse. The red ones. Elena's voice came weakly from behind him. Try the red wires. He looked back at her. How do you know? I don't, she admitted, her words slurring slightly. But my uncle was an electrician in Puebla. He always said red was power. Maybe you can restore something. Alexander found 2 red wires and pulled them free from their connections. Nothing happened. He tried touching them together and a small spark flew. The emergency lights flickered, but didn't strengthen. The hissing from the ventilation continued, relentless. The chemical smell was getting stronger, and Alexander felt his own head beginning to swim. How long had they been trapped? 15 minutes? 20? He pulled out his phone again. Still no signal, but he opened his voice recorder anyway. If they didn't make it out, if Victoria's plan succeeded, at least there would be some record of the truth. My name is Alexander Thornton, he said into the phone, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Today is August 15th, 2024. I'm trapped in my building's private elevator with Elena Martinez, my employee. I believe my fiancée, Victoria Ashworth, has orchestrated this situation with the intent to kill me and make it look like an accident or disappearance. Elena tried to warn me, but I didn't listen soon enough. Don't, Elena whispered. Don't give up. Not yet. Alexander moved back to her side, still holding the phone. I'm not giving up. But if something happens to me, I need the truth recorded. Elena, tell me everything you know. Everything you heard, everything you found. Elena's eyes focused with effort. She understood what he was doing, creating evidence, protecting her, ensuring that even if they didn't survive, Victoria wouldn't get away with it. 3 weeks ago, Elena began, speaking slowly and clearly toward the phone. On July 25th, I overheard Victoria Ashworth on the phone. She was on Mr. Thornton's penthouse balcony, and I was cleaning the adjacent guest room. She said, once Alexander is gone, everything will be mine. The wedding was just to make sure the prenup wouldn't matter. She was talking to someone she called David. She mentioned elevator maintenance schedules and something about making it look like carbon monoxide from a faulty system. Elena paused to cough, and Alexander held the phone closer to her. I found emails on her laptop, Elena continued. Correspondence with someone at Apex Building Systems. That's not your usual contractor, Mr. Thornton. The emails discussed installing a special ventilation override in Elevator 7, your private elevator. There were transfers of money, large amounts. $50,000, then another $75,000. Alexander's jaw clenched. Apex Building Systems. He'd never heard of them, which meant Victoria had brought in outside contractors without his knowledge. How had she managed it? Then, he remembered, he'd given her access to building management 3 months ago when she'd complained about the temperature in the penthouse. A gesture of trust that she'd weaponized. What else? He pressed gently. She's been drugging your evening tea, Elena said, and Alexander heard the guilt in her voice. I'm so sorry I didn't stop her sooner. I saw her adding something to your tea last week, and I switched the cups when she wasn't looking. I took the drugged one. It made me sick for 2 days, but I couldn't tell you because I had no proof it was her. Elena, Alexander breathed, overwhelmed by what she'd sacrificed for him. She's also been meeting with a man at the Plaza Hotel every Tuesday afternoon, Elena continued, her words coming faster as if she feared she'd lose consciousness before finishing. I followed her once. Same man from the phone call, I think. David Reeves. I took pictures. She gestured weakly toward her small purse on the floor. In my phone. In the cloud. Alexander lunged for her purse, dumping its contents. Her phone, an old, cracked model she'd probably used for years, fell out along with her keys, a worn wallet, and a rosary. He picked up the phone, but of course it was locked. 6283, Elena said. My mother's birthday. Alexander unlocked it and immediately saw what Elena had risked everything to collect. Photos of Victoria meeting a hard-looking man in his 50s. Photos of documents Elena had clearly taken when Victoria wasn't around. Building schematics, bank statements, email printouts. Evidence. You did it, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. Elena, you did it. This is enough to prove everything. Only if we survive to show it, Elena replied, and then her eyes rolled back. Elena! Alexander dropped the phone and grabbed her shoulders. Her skin was cold, clammy. Her pulse was weak, but present. Whatever drug Victoria had given her was reaching its peak. Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. He could feel how small she was, how fragile. This woman had put herself between him and death, and he'd never even told her how much her presence in his life had meant. Stay with me, he whispered into her hair. Please, Elena, stay with me. His own vision was starting to blur at the edges. The gas, whatever it was affecting him too. But he couldn't let Elena face this alone. If these were their last moments, he wanted her to know she mattered. I'm sorry, he said softly. I'm sorry I didn't see you. Really see you. You've been saving my life in small ways every day for 2 years, and I never thanked you properly. I never asked about your dreams, your family, your life outside my walls. I treated you like furniture, like someone who existed only to serve me. Elena's eyes fluttered open, just slightly. You weren't cruel, she whispered. That was enough. No, Alexander said firmly. No, it wasn't enough. You deserved so much more. You deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be. He couldn't finish the sentence because the truth of it struck him like lightning. Elena deserved to be loved. And somewhere in the past 2 years, amid the small kindnesses and quiet understanding, he'd fallen in love with her. Not the passionate, consuming fire that the magazines wrote about. Not the calculated partnership he'd thought he'd had with Victoria. But something real and deep and true, the kind of love built on daily choices, on seeing someone's soul and wanting to protect it. I see you now, he said, his voice breaking. I see you, Elena. And I'm not going to let Victoria take you from this world. With renewed determination, Alexander laid Elena gently on the floor and returned to the exposed wiring. He started systematically trying different combinations, connecting and disconnecting wires. The elevator lurched suddenly, dropping about 6 inches before catching on the emergency brakes. Alexander's heart leaped. The brakes were still functional, which meant the elevator wasn't completely dead. There was still power somewhere in the system. He looked at the ceiling. The emergency escape hatch. Every elevator had one. But it was designed to be opened from the outside by rescue personnel. From the inside, it would require. Alexander looked down at his hands, at the blood from the cut on his palm, at the expensive Italian shoes he wore. Then he looked at Elena, unconscious on the floor. He would climb. He would fight. He would do whatever it took. Because Elena Martinez had never given up on him, and he would not give up on her. Alexander pulled himself up onto the elevator's handrail, his dress shoes slipping against the polished metal. The escape hatch was about 8 feet above the elevator floor, manageable for a man who worked out regularly, except his head was swimming from the gas, and his hands were shaking. Below him, Elena lay still. Too still. He could see her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. But for how much longer? I'm getting us out, he called down to her, not sure if she could hear him. I promise you, Elena. I'm getting us out. The hatch had a recessed handle, and Alexander stretched, his fingertips just brushing it. He jumped, grabbed it, and pulled. Nothing. The hatch was either locked or rusted shut from years of never being used. Alexander pulled harder, putting all his weight on it. His shoulder screamed in protest. He'd injured it playing tennis 6 months ago, and it had never fully healed. The pain was excruciating, but he didn't let go. Come on, he growled through clenched teeth. Come on. With a screech of metal that sounded like a miracle, the hatch gave way. It didn't open all the way, but it moved. A gap of about 3 inches appeared, and with it came a rush of fresh air from the elevator shaft. Alexander dropped back down, gasping. The fresh air was thin, but it was there. It might buy them time. He looked at Elena and made a decision. He had to get her up to that opening, closer to the fresh air. Even those few feet might mean the difference between life and death. Alexander gathered Elena in his arms, shocked again by how light she was. Had she been eating properly? Had he even noticed? So many things he'd failed to see. He positioned her in the corner of the elevator directly below the hatch, propping her in a sitting position. Then he climbed up beside her, bracing himself against the walls, and reached for the hatch again. This time, with adrenaline and desperation fueling him, he forced it wider. 6 inches. 9 inches. Finally, a foot just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Alexander pulled himself up, his head and shoulders emerging into the shaft. The darkness was absolute except for the faint emergency lights at intervals going up and down. He could see they were stuck between the 42nd and 43rd floors, the cables above them still taut and functional. "Help," he shouted into the darkness. "Help. We're trapped in elevator 7. His voice echoed and died. The shaft was a concrete coffin designed to contain sound. No one would hear him, but he could climb. The maintenance ladder was visible along the shaft wall, about 5 feet away. A dangerous distance, but possible. Alexander pulled himself fully through the hatch, balancing precariously on top of the elevator car. The metal beneath his feet groaned, and he froze, spreading his weight as evenly as possible. 5 feet. He jumped farther than that doing parkour in college. But that was 15 years ago, and he hadn't been dizzy from gas inhalation then. "For Elena," he whispered to himself. "For the woman who saved my life." Alexander backed up as far as he dared on the elevator roof, then ran and jumped. His hands caught the ladder, but his grip was weak. He slipped, fell. His foot caught on a rung. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through his ankle, but he held on. He hung there for a moment, upside down, his ankle screaming, before managing to flip himself upright and get both hands on the ladder. He climbed. Each rung was an agony. His injured shoulder felt like it was on fire. His ankle throbbed with each movement. The darkness pressed in around him, and twice he felt himself starting to black out, clinging to the ladder until his vision cleared. 43rd floor. The doors were closed, but there was an emergency release. Alexander found it and pulled. The doors cracked open an inch, then stuck. He wedged his fingers in and pulled with everything he had left. The doors opened. Alexander fell through into the hallway, landing hard on the plush carpet. For a moment, he just lay there, gasping, every muscle trembling. Then he remembered Elena, still trapped below, and forced himself to his feet. The 43rd floor was dark. It was after hours, and this floor housed a financial firm that closed at 6. But Alexander ran down the hallway until he found what he needed, a fire alarm. He smashed the glass and pulled the handle. Immediately, sirens began wailing throughout the building. Lights came on. Sprinkler systems activated, drenching Alexander in cold water that shocked him back to full consciousness. He ran back to the elevator shaft and looked down. In the flashing emergency lights, he could see the elevator car below, and through the open hatch, Elena's still form. "Hang on," he called down, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Hang on, Elena. They're coming." He found the stairs and ran down them, taking 2 and 3 at a time, his injured ankle protesting every step. He burst into the building lobby to chaos, security guards mobilizing, residents evacuating, fire trucks pulling up outside with sirens blaring. The private elevator. Alexander shouted at the head of security, a man named Rodriguez who'd worked in the building for 20 years. "Someone's trapped. Elevator 7, between 42 and 43. Rodriguez immediately radioed his team. "We show that elevator as operational, Mr. Thornton." "Are you sure?" "It's been tampered with." Alexander grabbed the man's shoulders. "Someone deliberately trapped us. There's gas being pumped into it. You need to get emergency services there now." Something in Alexander's face must have convinced him. Rodriguez spoke rapidly into his radio, and within seconds, a team of firefighters was being directed to the elevator shaft. Alexander tried to follow them, but a paramedic stopped him. "Sir, you need medical attention. You're bleeding and—" "Not until she's out," Alexander said firmly. "Elena Martinez. She's in that elevator, and she's been drugged. She needs help more than I do. But another paramedic was already bringing a stretcher. Alexander watched, his heart in his throat, as firefighters rappelled down the elevator shaft. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before they emerged carrying Elena's limp form. Is she? Alexander couldn't finish the question. She's breathing, one of the firefighters said. Weak pulse, but stable. We're taking her to St. Luke's. Alexander climbed into the ambulance with her, ignoring the protests. He held Elena's hand as the paramedics worked, starting IVs, checking vitals, placing an oxygen mask over her face. You did it, he whispered to her, squeezing her cold hand. You saved my life, Elena. Now let me save yours. Her fingers twitched in his grip, so faint he might have imagined it. But to Alexander, it was everything. At St. Luke's, they tried to separate them. Alexander refused. He stayed by Elena's bedside as doctors pumped her stomach, as they treated her for carbon monoxide poisoning and an unknown drug, as they stabilized her vitals. He was there when Detective Sarah Chin arrived, wanting to ask questions. He gave her everything, Victoria's name, the evidence on Elena's phone, the recording he'd made in the elevator. He watched as Chen's expression grew darker with each revelation. We'll issue a warrant for Victoria Ashworth immediately, Chen said. Mr. Thornton, you're lucky to be alive. If your maid hadn't. She's not just my maid, Alexander interrupted. She's the woman who saved my life. She's the bravest person I've ever met. And when she wakes up, I'm going to make sure she knows it. Detective Chen smiled slightly. I'll need to talk to her when she's stable. But Mr. Thornton, you should get that shoulder looked at. Doctor's orders. Alexander finally allowed himself to be examined. Torn rotator cuff, sprained ankle, cuts and bruises, mild carbon monoxide poisoning. The doctor wanted to admit him overnight for observation. No, Alexander said simply. I'm staying with Elena. So they brought a cot into her room, and Alexander lay there, watching the monitors that tracked her heartbeat and breathing, praying to a god he wasn't sure he believed in that Elena Martinez would open her eyes. The sun was rising over Manhattan when Elena's eyes finally fluttered open. Alexander was at her side instantly, his own exhaustion forgotten. Elena, he breathed. Thank God. Her eyes struggled to focus, confusion evident in their dark depths. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw from the gas and the medical tubes. Don't talk, Alexander said gently. You're safe. You're at St. Luke's Hospital. You've been unconscious for 14 hours. Elena's hand moved weakly, and Alexander caught it, holding it between both of his. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and tears began to slide down her cheeks. Hey, Alexander said, his own eyes stinging. It's okay. You're going to be okay. Elena shook her head slightly, and Alexander realized she wasn't crying from pain or fear. She was crying from relief, from the overwhelming emotion of having survived something that was meant to kill them. We made it, Alexander said, his voice thick. You kept me alive in that elevator, Elena. Your courage, your strength, you saved both of us. A doctor entered, a kind-faced woman in her 50s. Good morning, Ms. Martinez. I'm Dr. Patel. How are you feeling? Elena managed a weak, okay, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Patel conducted a brief examination, checking Elena's vitals and responses. You're very lucky, she said. Another 30 minutes of exposure, and the outcome could have been very different. The drug in your system was Rohypnol combined with a sedative. The person who administered it clearly wanted you incapacitated. Elena's eyes moved to Alexander, a question in them. Victoria's been arrested, he told her. The police found her at JFK trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. She had $2 million in cash and fake passports. They found everything, Elena. Your evidence, her co-conspirator David Reeves, the whole plan. She's going to prison. Elena's tears fell harder, and this time Alexander knew they were tears of vindication. For 3 weeks, she'd carried the weight of knowing terrible things, of being afraid and unsure, of feeling like no one would believe her. I'm so sorry I didn't listen sooner, Alexander said, his voice breaking. You tried to warn me, and I... Elena squeezed his hand with what little strength she had, silencing him. Her message was clear. It wasn't his fault. Dr. Patel smiled at them both. I'll give you some privacy. Ms. Martinez, you'll need to stay another day or two for observation, but your prognosis is excellent. You're a very resilient woman. After the doctor left, Alexander pulled a chair close to Elena's bedside. I need to tell you something, he began. Something I realized in that elevator when I thought we might not make it out. Elena watched him, her eyes wide and attentive despite her exhaustion. For 2 years you've been in my home, in my life, and I was so blind. I saw you as part of the furniture, someone who was just there. I never asked about your dreams, your fears, what you loved. I never really saw you. He paused, gathering his courage. But in that elevator, when I thought we were going to die, when you told me what you'd sacrifice to protect me, switching the drug T, following Victoria, putting yourself in danger, I finally saw you, Elena. Really saw you. Alexander stood, moving closer, still holding her hand. You're not just brave. You're extraordinary. You're intelligent, compassionate, selfless. You notice the things that matter. You remember when I'm stressed and play the right music. You understand my silences. You've been taking care of me in 1,000 small ways, and I never once thanked you properly. Elena's tears were flowing freely now, and Alexander reached up to gently wipe them away. When I was holding you in that elevator, thinking we might not survive, I realized something else, he continued, his voice soft. I realized that I've fallen in love with you. Elena's breath caught, her eyes widening. I know I have no right to say this, Alexander rushed on. I know the power dynamic is all wrong, that you might feel pressured, that after everything that's happened. Elena's hand moved to his lips, silencing him. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than before, though still rough. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you for a year, maybe longer, but I never dreamed you could see me that way. Alexander felt his heart might burst. How could I not? Elena, you're the best person I know. I'm just a maid, she said, old insecurities surfacing. No, Alexander said firmly. You're not just anything. You're Elena Martinez. You're a woman who risked everything to save someone else. You're someone who sees the best in people. You're the person who made a house into a home. He smiled through his tears. You're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with if you'll have me. Elena let out a laugh that turned into a sob. Alexander, I'm wearing a hospital gown and probably look terrible. You look beautiful, he said honestly. You always have. I just finally opened my eyes. A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Chen entered, followed by a uniformed officer. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but I need to take Ms. Martinez's statement. Elena glanced nervously at Alexander, and he squeezed her hand. I'll be right here, he promised. You're not alone. Never again. For the next hour, Elena told Detective Chen everything, every detail she'd observed, every piece of evidence she'd collected, every moment of fear and courage. Alexander listened, awed by her thoroughness, by how much she'd pieced together on her own. When she described switching the drug T and being sick for 2 days, Alexander had to close his eyes against the wave of guilt and gratitude. When she talked about following Victoria to the Plaza Hotel, despite being terrified, he wanted to pull her into his arms and never let go. You've given us everything we need for a solid prosecution, Detective Chen said when Elena finished. Ms. Martinez, you've done extraordinary work. Have you ever considered a career in law enforcement? Elena smiled weakly. I don't think I have the temperament for it. I disagree, Chen said. But regardless, you've helped ensure that Victoria Ashworth and David Reeves will face justice. They're both being charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and several other crimes. Thanks to you. After the detective left, Elena looked exhausted. Alexander helped her settle back into the pillows. Get some rest, he said softly. Will you stay? Elena asked, her eyes already closing. Always, Alexander promised. I'm not going anywhere. He sat beside her, holding her hand, watching her sleep. Outside the window, Manhattan was waking up, millions of people starting their day, unaware of the miracle that had occurred in one elevator shaft the night before. Alexander thought about how close he'd come to marrying Victoria, to building a life with someone who'd planned to kill him. He thought about how easily he might have missed seeing Elena, really seeing her, until it was too late. But fate, or God, or blind luck had put them in that elevator together. And Elena's courage had saved them both. "Thank you," he whispered to her sleeping form. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing something in me worth saving. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that faith." Elena stirred slightly, a small smile crossing her face, and Alexander knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. 3 months later, Alexander stood in his penthouse, no longer the sterile showcase it had been under Victoria's influence, but a real home. Elena had helped him transform it during her recovery, adding warmth and life to the cold modern space. The view hadn't changed. Manhattan still glittered below, the same skyline he'd looked out on for years. But everything else was different. Alexander was different. He'd spent the past months doing things he should have done years ago, really getting to know Elena, meeting her family, learning about her life before she'd come to work for him. Her father had passed away when she was 10, and her mother had worked 3 jobs to support Elena and her younger brother. Elena had been putting herself through community college when her mother got sick, and she dropped out to care for her. "I always meant to go back," Elena had told him one night as they sat together watching the sunset. But after Mom died, there were bills, and Carlos needed help with his tuition, and life got in the way. "What would you study?" Alexander had asked. "If you could do anything?" Elena had smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile he'd fallen in love with. "Business management. I know it sounds silly, but I've always been fascinated by how things run, how to make systems better. When I was cleaning, I'd think about efficiency, about how to organize things more effectively." "That doesn't sound silly at all," Alexander had said. "That sounds like exactly the kind of thinking my company needs." Now, 3 months later, Elena was enrolled at Columbia University's School of Business, with a full scholarship funded by the Thornton Foundation, a new charitable organization Alexander had established to help women from underserved communities access higher education. But more than that, Elena had joined Thornton Industries as a special consultant. Her insights into company operations, particularly regarding the treatment and concerns of support staff, had already led to major improvements in workplace culture. "You saw things no one else saw," Alexander had told the board when he'd introduced Elena. "She noticed problems, inefficiencies, and human needs that we'd all overlooked. If we'd been listening to people like Elena years ago, we'd be a better company." There had been skepticism at first. Of course there had been. The billionaire CEO promoting his former maid? The gossip had been brutal. But Elena had proven herself with her intelligence, her work ethic, and her genuine care for making things better. The scandal with Victoria had helped in a strange way. The story had made national news. Socialite plans to murder billionaire Fiancée, foiled by heroic Maid. Elena had become a symbol of courage and loyalty, which had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Victoria's trial was set to begin next month. She and David Reeves had both pled not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Detective Chen was confident they'd both be convicted. Alexander thought about Victoria sometimes, trying to understand how someone could pretend love so convincingly while planning murder. But mostly, he thought about how lucky he was that her plan had failed. A key turned in the lock, and Elena entered, carrying bags from the bookstore. She was wearing jeans and a Columbia sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked radiant. "You bought out the store again," Alexander teased, taking the bags from her. "It's not my fault my professors are so interesting," Elena protested, laughing. "Besides, you're the one who told me to follow my intellectual curiosity." Alexander pulled her close, kissing her softly. "I did say that. And I love seeing you this happy." Elena wrapped her arms around him, resting her head on his chest. They stood there for a moment, just holding each other, the way they did every day when she came home. Home. That's what the penthouse had become. Not his place that she worked at, but their home that they shared. "How was your day?" Elena asked, pulling back to look at him.
Productive, Alexander said.
The merger with Chin Technologies is finalized. And I've been thinking about your suggestion for the employee wellness program. And I think you're right. If we're going to ask people to give their best work, we need to support their whole lives: childcare, mental health services, flexible schedules. It's not just good ethics, it's good business. Elena smiled. My professor would love to hear you say that. We're studying corporate social responsibility next week. They moved to the kitchen, where Alexander started preparing dinner, something he'd learned to do over the past months, with Elena as his patient teacher. She sat at the counter, telling him about her classes, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. This was what Alexander had been missing all those years. Real connection, authentic companionship, someone who saw him not as a bank account or a status symbol, but as a person. I got an email from Carlos today, Elena said, referring to her brother. He wants us to come to his graduation in May. Of course we'll go, Alexander said immediately. I'm so proud of him. First in his family, with a medical degree. Second, Elena corrected gently. I'm finishing my bachelor's. You're right. I'm proud of you both. Alexander paused in his cooking. Elena, I've been thinking about something. She looked at him, and he saw a flicker of nervousness cross her face. These past months had been wonderful, but they'd both been cautious, taking things slow after the trauma they'd shared. Nothing bad, Alexander assured her. Just, we've been living together for 3 months now as a couple, and I wanted to ask if you'd like to make it official. Elena's eyes widened. Official? Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Not an engagement ring, he said quickly, seeing her expression. I know it's too soon for that, but a promise ring. A promise that I see you, Elena. That I value you. That I'm committed to building a life with you, at whatever pace feels right. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver band with a single diamond, elegant, understated, perfect. Elena's eyes filled with tears, the good kind. Alexander. You don't have to answer now, he said. Take your time, think about. Yes, Elena interrupted, laughing through her tears. Yes, I want that. I want all of it. A life with you, a real partnership. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. He'd asked her best friend from Colombia for her size. Elena held up her hand, admiring it, and then pulled Alexander into a kiss that felt like a promise all on its own. Later that night, they sat together on the balcony where Victoria had once stood plotting Alexander's death. But now it was a place of life, of hope, of 2 people who'd found each other against all odds. Do you ever think about that night? Elena asked quietly. In the elevator? Every day, Alexander admitted. But not the way you might think. I don't think about how close we came to dying. I think about how it was the night my life truly began. Elena looked at him, understanding in her eyes. Mine too. I spent so long feeling invisible, like I didn't matter. But you see me now. Really see me. I do, Alexander said. And, Elena, I want you to know you matter. You've always mattered. I was just too blind to see it before. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights. Alexander thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, so focused on business, on success, on maintaining an image that he'd nearly married someone who wanted him dead. He'd been living a half-life, surrounded by luxury but empty of meaning. Elena had changed everything. Not just by saving his life in that elevator, but by showing him what life could be when you truly saw the people around you, when you valued kindness over status, authenticity over appearances. I'm meeting with Detective Chin tomorrow, Elena said, to prepare for the trial. Are you sure you don't mind me testifying? Mind? Elena, I admire you for it. Victoria needs to face justice, and you're the one who made that possible. I'll be there with you every step of the way. Elena squeezed his hand. I'm not afraid anymore. Not of Victoria, not of what people think, not of anything. Because I have you, and I have myself. I know who I am now. Who are you? Alexander asked softly, though he already knew the answer. Elena smiled, that radiant smile that had captured his heart. I'm Elena Martinez. I'm a student, a daughter, a sister, a survivor. I'm someone who found her courage when it mattered most. And I'm someone who's learning that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about the everyday choice to see and value each other. You're wise beyond your years, Alexander said. I had a good teacher, Elena replied. My mother used to say that the hardest tests in life come before the lesson, not after. That night in the elevator was my test. But the lesson is this life we're building together. Alexander pulled her close, and they sat there until the stars came out, two people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances and emerged into the light together. The city below continued its eternal rhythm, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, each person carrying their own stories. But in that penthouse, on that balcony, two hearts beat in sync, the billionaire who'd learned to see beyond the surface, and the maid whose courage had saved them both. And as the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they didn't move. Because they were home, not in the penthouse, not in Manhattan, but in each other. That was the real miracle. Not that they'd survived the elevator, but that they'd found each other in the first place. And having found each other, they'd built something real, something true, something worth fighting for. Elena had saved Alexander's life that night. But in the months since, Alexander realized that Elena saved his life every day, simply by being herself, by showing him what really mattered, by teaching him to see. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. For what? Elena asked. For everything. For your courage. For seeing something in me worth saving. For being patient while I learned to see you. For this life we're building. Elena turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes full of love. You saved my life too, you know. Not just in the elevator, but by seeing me, by believing in me, by helping me see my own worth. We saved each other, Alexander. That's what love does. And there, under the Manhattan stars, surrounded by the city's symphony of life, Alexander Thornton knew without a doubt that he was the luckiest man alive, not because of his wealth or his success, but because he'd found Elena Martinez and she'd found him. The elevator had trapped them, but it had also freed them. Freed them from false lives, from blindness, from taking what mattered for granted. And in the freedom they'd found, they discovered something precious, a love built not on appearances or convenience, but on courage, on truly seeing each other, on choosing each other every day. That was the real story, not of a billionaire and his maid, but of two people who found each other when it mattered most and built a life worth living. Together.